everybody. Welcome to SOFcast. I'm your host, Mike Lundstrom, and I'm here with my co-host, Master Gunnery Sergeant Chance Stanley.
How's it going, Mike?
Hey, good to see you, man. Feeling good today, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited.
So, again, another great SOFcast coming at you. We've got a very special guest with us today. I've known him for, I think, a little bit over 10, 12 years almost. So he's a personal friend of mine, but he is a very accomplished career. He started, I picked him up or knew him in a battalion. He actually moved to a nominative level Senior Enlisted Leader position and hasn't looked back since. When you get to meet him, he's a very polished and refined speaker and an excellent leader. Welcome to the show, Command Sgt Major Rob Abernethy. How you doing today?
Hey, Mike, thanks for the intro. Polished and refined. I'll do my best to actually live up to that high bar. Thanks for the introduction.
That's only my perception. We'll see what the audience thinks. Anyway, so interesting. First of all, thanks for being here. Interesting career. I couldn't wait to get you on the show because as you've done for me in the past with my students in Summit Course, it's been a very interesting discussion. So we kind of want to peel that back. And Chance and I were talking earlier, and I think he's going to launch the first question because it was his idea to do this question, call to service, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just important. Everybody, we share a similar background, but the way we get here is often varied. So you've got a long and illustrious service, and I'm just interested in where did your original calling to serve, that feeling of a sense of duty or obligation to nation, something above selfless service come from to join the Army and then raise your hand again and then, move into special operations and so on. If you could just take us along that journey.
Yeah, Chance, and good to meet you, at least virtually. We don't know each other, at least not to this point, but
that'll change.
Thanks for what you're doing, and congratulations on your current job and what you'll be doing for SOCOM in the future. Yeah, it's a tough question because I had to rewind way back to kind of figure out where I was back in high school. So in the mid 80s, I was growing up and like all of us trying to figure out what we were going to do. I had the benefit of being an Army brat. So my dad was in the military, Vietnam vet, and infantry in Vietnam, then transitioned to a supply sergeant job for the rest of his career. And he retired a few years after I joined in 1987 himself. But I think most of it centers around family business. And what's interesting and also challenging, I think, for the military broadly, and then SOF more specifically, is, as those recruiting pools get smaller and smaller and smaller, it's going to be tough for us as we kind of go into the future because that family business aspect of what we do is not going to sustain us in the long run. But I'd say first it was just family business. My grandfather was in the military. My father was in the military. I felt like I wanted to be in the military, mostly to kind of give back to the institution that has given so much to me and my family. So I think that's the main thing. And then, of course, there was a strong desire to serve my country. I know it seems like a big kind of cliche thing, but it really rang true for me. I just wanted to serve my country and find an opportunity to give back.
Did you find yourself starting out off in SOF, or did somebody just hand you a Green Beret? How did you get there?
Yeah, I started my career as an infantry guy. My first duty station was the Old Guard in Washington, D.C., and did that for 3 years. And even though I was an Army brat, I had no idea about special operations. I didn't know anything about Green Berets or Rangers or anything else. Remember, my dad was a supply sergeant. So I was kind of brought up along those lines. I didn't have any kind of, broad or specific knowledge about SOF. It wasn't until I was in the Old Guard for a couple of years that I seen a couple of folks from the unit head to Special Forces Assessment and Selection that I'd start to ask questions. And I've seen a lot of folks come back, and few selected and many more non-selected. And I just had conversations with both crowds. And then I started just doing my own research. Back then we didn't have Google, but just started doing the research that I could to find out a little bit more about special operations and specifically Green Berets. And it piqued my interest, so much so that I said, hey, I'm going to get myself in shape, because I knew I had to be in shape, because most of the folks that I've seen that failed were in great shape, and they still couldn't physically get through Special Forces Assessment Selection. So I spent months getting in shape, obviously connected with a recruiter, and successfully navigated SFAS in the fall of 1990. And the rest is kind of history. Went shortly behind that, went to jump school and our primary leadership development course, as the basic leader course nowadays. And then off to the Q course in early 1991 and graduated the qualification course in October of 91.
That's incredible. And then your first assignment was with third group?
Yep. Yeah, those were back in the days when I initially went to 3rd Special Forces Group. And a funny story is I remember signing into the battalion, and the battalion CSM was gone. I won't mention his name, but the battalion CSM was gone. And, as you probably know, that it's a battalion sergeant major that does all the slating for new folks coming into the battalion. And since he was gone, one of the team sergeants out of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Group, saw me in processing, and they were getting ready to go on a JSET. And he had a conversation with me, asked me, who I was, and to get a little bit of information. Brand new 18 Echo communication sergeant coming into the battalion. He said, "Hey, we need a commo guy to go on this JSET with us. Would you like to come?" I was like, "Roger that, Sergeant. Why would I say no?" So brand new E5, just signing in, thinking about in a couple of weeks heading off to the continent of Africa with a brand new team. I was really, really excited about that. So went down, got introduced to the company sergeant major, started to do a little bit of the company in processing and continued to do battalion in processing as well. And it was the next day, I was in the headquarters and still doing some in processing. And I seen this guy show up and he's in civilian clothes. And he walks up to me and he says, "Hey, who are you?" And I introduced myself. I said, "I'm Sergeant Abernethy, 18 Echo, just came out of the Q course, heading to Charlie Company, getting ready to go on a JSET, sir." And he's like, "Oh, really? 18 Echo?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "No, you're going to go to the signal detachment." I was like, "No, I don't think so. I'm already set up. I'm down in Charlie Company, getting ready to head out on a JSET, sir." He's like, No, I don't think you understand. See, I'm the battalion CSM, and all of my communication sergeants go to the signal detachment first, and then they go to ODAs. So he had the ultimate trump card, and he trumped any plan that anybody else in the battalion had at that time. And I went to the signal detachment, which was a great learning experience all in itself. Obviously, and honestly, it was great because those were the days when we were actually using Morse code to transmit messages back and forth from the continent of Africa to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And of course, I learned that skill in the qualification course, but I really honed that skill while I was in the signal detachment for about 7 months before I went to my first ODA, which was a dive detachment in Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Group.
So I think it's interesting, you're constantly volunteering, right? You volunteer to serve your nation in the United States Army, then you volunteer again. Yeah, I'll go to SFAS, right? And, try to, work my way up and earn that beret. And then you're just checking into your first, operational battalion tactical level, but, and you're still day one, raising your hand in the air, right? So it's just interesting that it's like selection was over for you, but it wasn't, right? Every day assessment and selection, you're being scrutinized, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about that and then how you eventually, some of the key billets that you held in 3rd Group there as you worked your way up?
Yeah, Chance, I think that you're right. You're constantly making conscious decisions to say yes, and you're constantly being challenged. And there's goodness in that. I think when we feel as if we're no longer being challenged, we should probably seek other employment. And honestly, we should seek out those opportunities to be challenged. So you're right. Joining the military, deciding to volunteer to go to special forces, go to airborne school, get into the unit, and then be asked, "Hey, do you want to go to the dive detachment? And do you want to volunteer for that yet again?" And again, saying yes to that. It's this, we got to have this inside of us, this feeling inside of us where we want to say yes to everything and try everything out. And I will tell you, and many times in my career, especially my young career, I had a lot of angst in terms of, making those decisions to go to fill in the blank. But I've never said no. I've always said yes. And honestly, there's there's times that you're challenged and you're not sure if you're going to make it, and you just got to continue to actually push yourself. So I've been through some very tough training situations throughout my career, and definitely been through some tough, just tough situations in general in my career. But through all of it, it's I just had to stick with that mindset of, hey, I'm just not going to quit, and I'm just not going to say no. And I think that helped me to become a good team member to my team, a good communication sergeant to the detachment, always striving to be better at that, to be a good diver once I made it through dive qualification course. And then later in my career, I went to the dive supervisors course, and so on, and just continue to actually shoot for excellence. And honestly, that is something that I still espouse today to younger service members, broadly, in my current position here at U.S. European Command, is we should get, the Army just brought back the motto, be all you can be. I think we should strive to be all we can be with everything that we do daily, and try to be stronger tomorrow than we are today, honestly.
It's a great leadership nugget. I mean, you can't lead from the front unless you refine your craft and be the best at it. And I think that's true for a lot of our NCO Corps today. Really refine the craft. And so you're in the probably make company sergeant major at some point here, right? And you did one company, I assume,
Mm-hmm.
correct? And then you got went from company to battalion command sergeant major. Let's talk about, if you would walk us through that transition, your experience there, and the learning curve, if you will.
Yeah, sure. And I'll actually rewind back just a little bit and talk about my team sergeant time. And
That's
another
important.
highlight in my career, honestly, that was unique for me and unique for Special Forces guys, generally speaking. So I was an ODA guy in 3rd Special Forces Group for a number of years. And then at that time in the mid-90s was selected to go to U.S. Army recruiting course and to do recruiting duty as a detailed recruiter. And we still have recruiters. The Green Berets in the Army still have folks out on recruiting duty, although today they all work in the Special Operations Recruiting Battalion. When we first started sending people out to both drill sergeant and recruiting duty, that was as a regular Army recruiter. And I went out to Hattiesburg, Mississippi to beat the streets to get people into the Army, which was a unique challenge. From there, I went to first group, back to a dive detachment, and did more time there, transitioned from 18 Echo while I was there to 18 Fox intelligence sergeant, and did that for a couple of years until I was picked up for E8. And upon making E8, I stayed on the team and then got orders to go to Okinawa, Japan to be a team sergeant. En route, I went to SOFarTech, and I was an assault team sergeant in C11 for 3 years. So that was fantastic. I was about 15 years of service at the time, I think, and then got orders to come back to 3rd Special Forces Group. Asked to go back to the team that I started on, which I did, which is the dive detachment and 1st Battalion and Bravo Company 1st Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group, ODA 325, and did about 2 more years of team sergeant time. So I was very fortunate in that I had 5 years total team sergeant time, and it was all right after 9/11. I actually graduated SOFarTech on 9/11, which was an interesting day on Fort Bragg for sure, if you were there. Interesting day across the nation, honestly, for all of us.
Yeah.
But so for 5 years, I did 3 years in Okinawa, really focused in the southern Philippines, which was a great assignment at a great time, and then came back, started doing team sergeant rotations and into Afghanistan as well. But I had 5 years, and at that time, I was planning to get out. I hadn't hit 20 years of service yet, and then was picked up for E9. So I was at this inflection point as to, hey, am I going to stick with this promotion and then continue my career, or should I decide not to take the promotion and retire? And I felt a sense of duty to this institution, and I was excited about the opportunity to serve at another level. Honestly, as a team sergeant, that was a highlight. I think for most Green Berets, to be a team sergeant on a detachment is the pinnacle of one's career, and I would say it was absolutely a pinnacle for me as well. But anyway, I took the promotion, went out to the Sergeant Major's Academy at Fort Bliss, Texas, did that for a year and came back. And my first job as an E9 was as the Ops Sergeant Major for the battalion. So this is the first leap, because everything that I just described was all very tactically oriented and tactically focused. And I didn't have to have any visibility of, any kind of big picture ideas. But now to go and work as the Ops Sergeant Major for a battalion at a very busy time in terms of preparation for another rotation downrange, meeting all kinds of red cycle taskings there on Fort Bragg. That was a huge leap for me because I just hadn't been exposed to it. Never worked at the company level, never worked at the battalion level. All of my time has been at the tactical level inside of ODAs prior to that.
Let me pause you real quick there. Can you, just for our audience, just describe what a red cycle is? Many may not know what that is. Red cycle tasking.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Mike. So every group, every organization probably terms these things differently, but they do this. They run through the same cycle of maybe an operational cycle where the units inside the organization are going to be focused on meeting current operational requirements, which might actually include deployments. You're going to be, from there, you'll run into another cycle, which might be a train up cycle, which is a train up for the cycle that I just described. So you're really working on kind of building readiness inside your organization to meet the operational cycle. And then you have another cycle, red cycle, which means you're now down. This is an opportunity for people inside the organization to take leave, work on building individual skills and many other things, more decentralized, if you will. So, and at the same time, you get a lot of taskings from your higher unit because you are in red cycle to actually meet individual requirements, either for the brigade or group level or across the installation. In my case, it was Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So what I want the audience to take away is how busy that is and all the stuff you're tracking in the 3 shop, right? I had some time there myself, so I totally understand. But yeah, keep going with your story.
So anyway, we were talking about kind of the transition. So that was the one big transition, Ops Sergeant Major. From there, I went down to take a company, as you stated, as a company Sergeant Major, and did a deployment with that company, which was a fantastic experience. And honestly, I would say that the greatness about having that operations sergeant experience first really helped me to be a great company Sergeant Major. Because now I knew the systems, the processes. I also had built a lot of relationships, personal relationships with folks on the staff at the battalion and beyond, which I did get to leverage at times as a company sergeant major. That was very helpful for me personally, but helpful for the organization too. From there, I came back from that deployment. It was already decided that I was going to be a command sergeant major at that point. Just hadn't figured out where I was going to be slated. And in the interim, they wanted to find another job for me to do. So I worked as the Army Special Operations Forces proponent sergeant major inside of the Special Warfare Center and school. So at that time, we managed all 3 elements of Army Special Operations ground formations, be it psychological operations, civil affairs, and the special forces units. So that was another good experience for me. I did that for about a year, and then went out to take my first battalion, my first tactical battalion, which is 1st Battalion, 5th Special Forces Group at Fort Campbell, and did that for 2 years. And then from there, did a second tactical SF battalion back in 1st Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group. And then from there was then selected after about a year of being in 3rd Group and another deployment under my belt to be the Senior Enlisted Leader for General Nugget at Special Operations Command Central.
Yeah, we're going to get to that one in a second. I want to back the truck up just a little bit though, because I
figured you would.
Yeah, that jump into the battalion. Now your challenges, your scope of responsibility become much greater. What kind of leader did you have to become to be able to manage and lead through that?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, Mike. I felt like the jump to a battalion level job in terms of, kind of scope and breadth was not overwhelming because it was familiar territory for me, especially working as a sergeant major in the operations shop, the S3 shop, and as working as a company sergeant major as well. And then having some of the big picture view as I worked for a year as a Special Forces or the Army SOF proponent sergeant major. So as I went into Fort Campbell in 5th Group as a battalion CSM, I felt like I had all the advantage of experience to do well in the job. And I was pretty comfortable. Obviously, the one thing that I had to work through is I had to build new relationships with new people because I was newly introduced to 5th Special Forces Group, never had been there before. So that was my largest challenge, I think, is to gain credibility with the people inside the battalion, and then gain credibility with the folks at the higher headquarters, the group level, and with the team of other command teams across the other battalions as well. I was kind of an unknown quantity, and this is still in the day. We were in the early days. This is 2010 timeframe. And at that time, we didn't see a whole lot of that group transfer activity going on. Nowadays, it's much more common, and I think it, to some extent, probably healthy for the organizations to have some of that cross-pollination, if you will.
I want to pull that thread if I can. So you talked about how you spent time in 3rd Group, 1st Group, now you're at 5th Group. Many SOF professionals may find themselves the preponderance of their careers. They spend in one group or one organization that's very regionally aligned and focused. The pros to that, obviously, they're building cultural, language, regional expertise. But the downsides to that could be you sort of get painted into a little bit of a corner. Maybe you don't have a full appreciation strategically for other regions. And then at the higher levels, when you're expected to move and take command and send up at a higher level, you may be caught a little bit flat-footed. So can you talk to us about how maybe those prior experiences aided you as you moved up to that CSM position in 5th Group, or maybe some challenges that came along where you didn't grow up in 5th Group?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a challenge that we're going to continue to deal with, and it really kind of speaks to where do we want to make our investments? Because you can make investments in people and institutions that's going to be focused and give you deep knowledge, on a specific region. So you can get really, really deep from an individual and from an institutional perspective, which is helpful. But how does that actually balance with, gaining broad experience? Because I think, so having that deep knowledge is great for tactical level folks. I mean, that's what's really great about Special Operations Command, wholly, is they bring a lot of that deep knowledge, and they do to us here in U.S. European Command as well, with the TSOC and the elements that actually support the TSOC, that have great long knowledge and long relationships with elements that are here. But as you continue to ascend in your career, that the challenge is you don't have broad experience. And that's what we have to do is how do we actually build broad experience? And I think that's the advantage to the military model of moving every 3 years, is it gives you as individuals in that moving model the opportunity to get many experiences all across the globe from different organizations that might be slightly different than your last. And I think that helps broaden folks out in the long run. So it's tough for us to do, because where do we want to make our investments, and at what time, and with whom? We got to be very deliberate about it. So when we think about talent management, which is some buzzwords that people like to throw around quite a bit, we got to take this into consideration in terms of when to do it. My situation was more happenstance than deliberate, obviously, and it was just all about timing and luck and some personal preference, honestly, in terms of having some desires to go to see other things and do other things. But I will tell you that experience outside of 3rd Special Forces Group, which is my home group, was hugely valuable, because it did help me to bring new perspectives back into the organization. The fact that, as you pointed out, Chance, that I spent time in 3rd Group and time in 1st Group, and then took all that collective experience to 5th Group, I think was very, very helpful. I had the benefit of going to 1st Battalion as the CSM, which also includes the SIF for the organization, or at least at that time it was the SIF. And I had SIF experience too myself in a different group. So I could actually bring that SIF experience that I picked up in Okinawa to the SIF in 5th group and spend some time with them to give them some new ideas about how to get after doing the mission that they were asked to do.
So real quick for the audience, just if you would just break down the SIF acronym for them a little bit.
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Yeah,
Mike.
it's just context. We have a very broad audience, so.
Yeah, so the SIF stands for Commanders in Extremis Force, and it's basically a forward, and not in all cases, but in the case of Okinawa, it was a forward-placed crisis response force, for lack of a better term, that can do everything from hostage rescue to other missions as well. So they've changed, the term for SIF has changed over the years. It went from Commanders in Extremis Force to Commanders Response Force. And today in Special Forces, I think we've actually dissolved those companies in function, and now they're regular Special Forces companies as well. So It's kind of changed a little bit over time.
Yeah, it's important to understand the tool is still there to the commander, right?
That's right.
The capability is still there no matter what they call it, but to be able to react to situations is pretty important. But thanks for that. So this so far really, really interesting. And now we're about to make the big leap. You mentioned it before, going from battalion, and most senior enlisted leaders, command sergeant majors, end up getting a group at the 06 level C cells, what we call it, right? But you didn't. You did 2 battalions instead, and then you fleeted up through interviews and selection to SOCcent. Tell us a little bit about that.
So honestly, that was one of the largest challenges I've had in my career, especially leadership career, I would say, because it was just so vastly different from what I was doing as a battalion sergeant major. And that too is probably more just happenstance than being deliberate. I remember I just returned from a deployment as a battalion sergeant major with 3rd group. And I was running around the base one day, getting some things done as we do when we get back from deployments. And as I headed back into the headquarters late in the day, the adjutant came to me and he said, "Hey, not George Becker, it's Sergeant Major Becker from USASOC called, and you need to go to his office." And I was like, "Okay, no problem." And his office was across the street from our headquarters. And I said, "Well, what time did he call, sir?" And he said, "Oh, about 5 hours ago." And I lost my mind. I was like, 5 hours ago, he called and wanted me in his office. Shoot, I'm in trouble. And so obviously I left promptly and went over to the USAC headquarters. And I get up into George Becker's office. And I remember sitting on his couch, which is always awkward. And George sits on the couch too. And it's kind of hard to have like a comfortable conversation as you're sitting on the couch, if you can imagine it. So I'm sitting on the couch looking at him, trying to be in my professional pose. And he's sitting there on the couch having a conversation with me. And we're just having a little bit of small talk. And I just came back from a deployment, so I have no idea where this conversation is going. But after the little bit of small talk that George decided to give me, he said, "Hey, Rob, you're tracking along and doing quite well, and we could definitely see groups or major potential in your future. However, we need somebody to actually compete for one of the TSOCs, and that TSOC is Special Operations Command Central. Are you interested in the job?" Without hesitation, and this connects to what we talked about earlier, Chance, I said yes. Yeah, just raised my hand and said yes, without even understanding the implications. Yes, Sergeant Major, was my answer to him. And then we talked about it a little bit more and talked about why, and I won't get into all that. But the bottom line is, I left his office and it was yes, and I had to go back and now tell my then girlfriend, not yet wife, Angela, that, hey, heading down to, I'm going to head down to Tampa to do this interview, and if selected, maybe moving to Tampa. And remember, we just moved from Fort Campbell to Fort Bragg about 14 months prior to that. So I hadn't been at Fort Bragg very long. And honestly, 9 months of that was deployed. So I was deployed downrange in Afghanistan. So now fast forward, I did get selected, obviously. I went and did that job for General Nagata, and it was a fantastic job in the long haul. But I will tell you, I struggled for the first 3 or 4 months. I struggled in that job because I just did not see how an NCO like myself added value to that organization. And I kept traveling around with General Nagata, had several conversations with him, and he was hugely supportive. And every night I would sit there and struggle. And this is one of those times when, I've done well at many things in my career, but I felt like I was, underwater and not getting enough air to kind of keep myself up. So it was just a huge struggle. Long story short, what I came to realize after being in the organization for about 3 months is where I could add best value is being what I termed at the time a strategic translator. And what I meant by that was a lot of the conversations I was in and the meetings that I was in at the headquarters were really at the operational, kind of at the strategic level as well. So to have good insight and good understanding as to what was going on and what was being said in those meetings and why decisions were being made was helpful to then translate as I would go out and about throughout the CENTCOM AOR and talking to tactical elements to tell them, really answer 2 questions for them. Why and how? Why are they actually on the ground? And then how does their activity fit into the proverbial big picture? So to be able to answer that in those terms from that translation that I understood in the strategic environment down to the tactical level, I thought was, hugely helpful for those folks. Because how many times have we been in a place wondering, why am I here?
Absolutely.
Why is this valuable? But at the same time, that translation works both ways. I would gather information from those folks at the tactical locations, and I would reverse translate it into advice to my commander, that at that time General Nagata, and advice and tasks to the staff at Special Operations Command Central. So and talk about the implications, or as I see them, the implications to tactical elements with the decisions that were going to be made at the operational level there at the TSOC. So at the Theater Special Operations Command. So I thought, that's where I actually found a lot of value, is to be that strategic translator. At the battalion level, you are absolutely and should be focused on building readiness at each of those companies and at the battalion collectively, and you should be down and in. You'll be spending a lot of time with your commander, and rightly so, you should be spending a lot of time with your commander. As soon as you get to the nominative level, working for a general or flag officer, you're going to start spreading away from your general or flag officer, and you got to start doing some activities on your own. I mean, now, and to that point where I am nowadays, I might see my boss once a month. He doesn't even live here in Stuttgart. He lives in Mons, Belgium. So it does become a challenge. But anyway, going back to that transition from battalion to the nominative level was very, very challenging. And you got to find where you actually add value to that organization. And when you find that you actually add value, I think that's helpful for self.
It's interesting that you struggled in the beginning, but more so with finding your niche, where do I fit in? And I think probably 2 things factor into that, right? Every organization is different. So depending on the sort of state of the union, if you will, you might have to adapt your leadership style to be the leader that organization needs. And then coupled with, what does the commander expect from you? And so those initial counselings and sort of figuring out, how do we complement each other to lead this organization into the future? And, it's just interesting to hear you say that at your level, that doesn't really go away, right? You can see that at the battalion level, and it just keeps going, although it grows in scope.
Yeah, Chance, you're spot on.
Yeah, you had to prepare yourself too. You just didn't walk into these areas. Somehow you picked up either a mentor, education, something to get you there. What advice would you offer to future leaders about preparing yourself for that nominative level?
Well, Mike, I think you gave the answer to the question. I mean,
I did.
That was a loaded question. A loaded question.
Yeah.
It was already self-loaded. But I'll just reemphasize the value of actually having solid mentors that are out there, and be inquisitive. Use those mentors that and that you trust, and just have real conversations with them. And There's a lot of great senior leaders that are out there that would be happy to, take time out of their day to do exactly that. Have a conversation with you, because that's how we learn. We should be learning, one, through just these conversations and experience, and then to your second point, and then in terms of education, both the professional military education that we get, and the civilian education that you have an opportunity to take advantage of. Complementing both of those, and then creating this mindset of being a lifelong learner. I know it's a buzzword that people like to pass around.
So true.
But in reality,
so true. Sorry, I didn't mean to step over you. So true. So true.
That's okay. But in reality, that's what we need to be. We should be inquisitive with everything that we do. And when you have questions about stuff, seek answers from institutions, seek answers from people, and never be satisfied, is what I would say. It's just never be satisfied with where you sit.
I want to pull a thread if I can. We've talked about, your ability without hesitation to continually raise your hand and volunteer for things. Sometimes, without even hesitation, just without reflecting on it, just, yeah, I'll do it. I was just thinking, I have my vision of standing in the door, jumper in the door, right? And I'm gonna, when the jump master says go, I'm gonna go, and then I'm gonna figure out everything else on the way down. And you've had a lot of success in your career, and it's still ongoing. But I don't think any of that would have been possible without taking care of yourself. And I think we're in the, obviously, U.S. Special Operations Command, we're in the middle of Wellness Week right now. So we're touching all these pillars of POTFF, and not just the physical and getting strong in the gym, but the mental side, mental health, spirituality, cognitive. And so can you just talk to us a little bit about work-life balance and how your relationship with your family has enabled you to be successful in your career?
Yeah, thanks, Chance. I think that gives me a good opportunity to talk about something that's very important to our business, and that is about taking care of self. I mean, if you want to take care of an organization, you got to, like Stephen Covey says, you got to start with yourself. You got to start taking care of yourself first. And then I think you got to do that holistically, to your point, mind, body, spirit, and social. And I think the family is included in all elements that I just listed. When I think about it, I think of those mind, body, spirit, and social as all being individual fuel tanks that actually feed an engine. If any one of them is low, then you're going to get air inside the line, and that engine is going to run less efficiently. So the goal is to keep all of those tanks full all of the time. That's what we should be doing. And I think that's a challenge for many. Definitely a challenge for me, for sure. But I've really kind of focused on that over time to make sure that I'm investing in all. It becomes more and more challenging, I think, to your point, Chance, as you continue to ascend in the organization, especially to kind of reach this work-life balance, which is another great fancy phrase that people like to throw out now. The great thing about it is when you kind of think of work-life balance, a lot of people think that you set the fulcrum in the middle, if you will, and you can actually create balance by putting equal weight on either side, because that's the way you would get balance. The reality is you're never going to get a 50-50, opportunity from a time perspective for investment between work and life. It's just not real. What you're going to see is the fulcrum is going to be offset, probably significantly offset, and that offset gets further and further exacerbated as you go further up in the organization. In terms of most of your time investment is going to be with work, and less of your time investment is actually going to be with life, and that life includes family. So when I think about this fulcrum, the way you actually gain balance when the fulcrum is offset is I got to put more weight over here. More weighted effort has to be on the short side of the stick, if you will. And what that means to me, the way that I translate that is, when I'm home, I'm going to make sure that I'm home. I don't stay in the office in the evening past 5:30. I have twins now that are 3.5 years old, a boy and a girl. And one of my goals is to eat dinner with them every night that I'm in Stuttgart. And then read them a book at night and put them to bed, and be very deliberate about that. I don't spend a bunch of time checking email, and definitely not responding to emails in the evenings or on the weekends. I will check email, but I won't respond. And I think that's important too. And the bottom line is that you're not going to have as much time, but you got to make sure that the time that you do have is spent well, doing, activities that matter and taking time to actually connect with, in my case, my wife and my kids. Regardless of your family situation, you should definitely pay attention to that, because that fulcrum is just going to continue to move to the short side of the stick over the course of your career as you ascend in the organization.
Yeah. Another catchphrase that gets thrown around a lot is value proposition, right? So what you're talking about is maximizing your value proposition to family as well. So it's not just being there physically, but having actual quality time and creating meaningful memories really with the time that you do have.
Exactly right, Chance. You're exactly right.
Yeah, my wife is going to watch this and go, "See, I told you so." Right. But it's amazing. And what I want to do is kind of transition to the professional side a little bit. So we got to the point where you were at SOCcent, and now you're up for interview to you, sir. And now where you sit today, because I don't think we did a good job in the introduction on that, but you're the UCOM Senior Enlisted Leader, and you've been there about a year plus now, right? Ish.
About a year.
Yeah, about a year, right? Yeah, about a year. So in between those three areas, you had to interview, and they were probably all three distinct interviews. For the audience that's interested in this particular area, would you talk about the interviewing process and how you kind of prepare yourself for that? And then obviously we know where you landed, so it must have been successful, but please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I will say up front, if you've done one interview, you've done one interview. They will all be different. And I've done several interviews where I was not selected, and I've done a few interviews where I was selected. So when I left SOCcent, remember I went to U.S. Army Special Operations Command back at Fort Bragg. So
that's right. Yeah, I skipped one.
3 years there with General Tovo, and then from there went to interviewed with General Hodges at the time, which was the prior to General Cavoli's stint as the commander for U.S. Army Europe and Africa. He was the commander there, and I did that interview with him. He was actually driving down the road at the time on a phone call with me. In terms of preparation, it's tough because, like I said, every interview is going to be a little bit different. One would be very smart to actually have some base understanding of what the organization is and what that organization does. I mean, you'd be silly not to do that. Where are their current focus areas? What are they prioritizing currently? You should definitely know that. I wouldn't spend a whole bunch of time going too deep, down that road, because most commanders, I don't think, expect you to have deep knowledge, especially if you're an outsider looking to come into a job, as I was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, interviewing for Army Europe. I think the thing, and this is what I tell folks as I give advice, I think the thing that's most important is to find some chemistry between yourself and the person conducting the interview. Because at the end of the day, that general or flag officer that's doing the interviews has a slate of 4, 5, or 6 very solid candidates. I mean, I've seen these slates built in Army formations and seen the results of them in joint formations, and literally every one of the folks that are on those slates, they're solid. The general flag officer could hang all of those folks up against the wall, their names up against the wall, throw a dart at the wall, and the person that the dart landed closest to, they could select that person and they do a fine job. But what they need is somebody they can connect with. They need somebody that they can actually have a real conversation with. And I think that most of our very senior officers are looking for that, because if you think about it, the further they ascend in their organizations, especially as they get to the nominative ranks, they are typically geographically and physically far from folks that are, on the same level as them. So they don't have opportunities to have real conversations in a small room with somebody. So to have a strong personal connection with another person in the headquarters is hugely valuable. And oftentimes that strong personal connection is going to be with the general's senior enlisted leader.
That's an incredible answer, and you've certainly had a parade of them throughout your career. Pretty interesting. So they keep you very busy. I do want to ask, because you stay busy, how do you take care of yourself? You know, what from diet to exercise to reading, educating, whatever it is that you do to take care of yourself to stay in this marathon?
I think you got to be very deliberate about planning your days and weeks. And then you got to stick to the schedule. You know, they say you plan the dive and you dive the plan. It doesn't always work out that way, but you should definitely plan the dive for sure in terms of having an idea of what you're going to do. So I get up every single morning and go out and do PT as an example. So I'm hitting that physical thing. And honestly, that helps kind of clear my mind. Secondly, one of the things that I always do is I always carve out time in my calendar, usually about 2 hours on my calendar once a week, where it's time for reflection. Because what you'll find is you get to these very busy schedules and you'll just go from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting, but you never really get a true opportunity to think about what you've just discussed. Think about what the organization is doing. And more importantly, what are the implications to the, you know, some of the recommendations that are being made? That's where I really find a lot of value. And when I say reflection, I'm not talking about looking at my computer or checking email or even listening to music. I'm talking about I close the door, turn literally everything off, and I open up my notebook and I just read my notes and reflect on the meetings that I've had for the week, the engagements that I've had for the week, and what are the implications of everything, and then kind of think about a look forward. You know, or does that reflection time give me time to kind of think about what I'm doing? In terms of, you know, diet and sleep, these are two areas that are very challenging, especially when you got busy travel schedules. It's hard to kind of stay on schedule, and even though I work deliberately to do the best I can with it, it is still a challenge, specifically for sleep. Eating, I do fairly well, but when you're in travel mode, what you're doing is really kind of going with the crowd. If the crowd is going out to yet another dinner, a hosted dinner, then I'm going to the hosted dinner and I'm eating whatever they're going to eat. I offset that with a lot of, PT. So bottom line is you got to have a payment plan. You either pay ahead or pay after. So whatever it is you're eating, you got to have a plan to, you know, burn it away as well. And then sleep, which I think is, you know, hugely important. Right now, I average about 6 hours a night. Not quite enough, better than I used to get, but not quite enough. But that's probably about where I am right now. So going back to where I started, I think it's just really about having a very deliberate plan, and then doing everything you can to actually stick to the plan as much as possible. Because especially as you get older, it's very easy to kind of slip into some other space and never be able to climb out of the hole that you're getting yourself into, in terms of not doing PT, in terms of not eating well, in terms of not sleeping, all those things that are bad and you know you shouldn't do. As you get older, if you start trotting down that path, it's hard to get back on the path.
That's interesting. Go ahead.
Hey, CSM. So you're the Command Senior Enlisted Leader of UCOM, obviously. And I think the 800-pound gorilla in the room, right, is the conflict in Ukraine, right? So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that. Just over a year now since the conflict kicked off. In your estimation, from where you sit, your perspective, you know, how critical of a role has SOF played, in theater, and what kind of impacts have they had in the European continent?
Suffice it to say, it's had huge impact, and I'm not even talking just the U.S. SOF impact on operations. I'm talking the collective international SOF impact on operations. I think it's been huge. It really has been huge, and absolutely impactful. So much so that, you know, it just kind of goes back to kind of prove our model. And when I say I'm talking about the Special Operations Command model of small investments, huge returns. It's easy to, send small teams out to do, unique things for us, where it actually has huge returns in terms of benefit to operations. So we, the U.S. and the U.S. SOF, are doing a lot of good work in terms of building capacities across the board. So that's very helpful. International communities got, fantastic access, in many different areas. And when you mesh it all together, and all the SOF communities that are out here in Europe are all working together and collaborating together to make this patchwork of investments, work to be something that is very, very good.
CSM, is there anything that you would like to leave for our listening audience or viewership? Any nugget of advice from your senior enlisted strategic level leadership position that you would want people to take away from this? Once the podcast ends, what's that one little nugget of advice that they could sort of take away with them?
Well, I guess the nugget of advice that I would give would be kind of targeted to the folks that are kind of still at the tactical level now, that might aspire to do something bigger than what they're doing right now. I will tell you, cherish the time that you have, because that time is absolutely precious. And for me, it was exactly the same. And then, just don't be in a large rush to actually do more. I think that you can focus on becoming an expert in your field is going to be huge. Too many times, I think we get some folks that start to think about career progression and think about, doing other things, and it kind of clouds their ability to actually be as great as they can be with the job that they have. So I would ask folks, hey, just dismiss any of that stuff. Love the job that you have. Focus on that day in and day out. And then at some point in time, you're going to be doing such a great job. There's going to be some leader out there that's going to come in and pull you out and say, hey, now it's time to actually invest your talent in another location. But until then, don't be distracted by, what's next. A lot of people ask that question, hey, what's next for you? Don't even worry about it. Just focus on what you got here and now. Focus on taking care of yourself, the folks to your left and right, and obviously your family. That needs to be the focus up front.
Yeah. Hey, CSM, thanks you so much. Certainly, our conversation has been insightful, and some of the advice and just lessons learned over your long career have been helpful to me, and I'm sure to our audience as well. So I just want to say thanks for coming out on behalf of General Fenton, on CSM Shorter, and all of U.S. Special Operations Command. Thank you, CSM Abernethy, for coming out and joining us today. To our listenership and viewership out there, you can check us out on Apple Podcasts. We've got a bunch of episodes coming up with a lot of highlights, and of course across LinkedIn, social media, Facebook, and drop us a line directly at SOFcast@socom.mil. Thanks, everybody.